Hello, good morning. This is the DLCD Oregon Housing Needs Analysis Housing Actions Work Group, meeting number 9. I'm Deb Myhoff with Communitas, facilitating this morning. If you could share the screen for the agenda, I'll do a quick recap of the agenda. We'll do a reminder of ground rules, and then we'll have some introductions. And probably by then, most of the folks will be here. One more slide, please. Great. So I think you all know this, but just to recap, the primary purpose of this meeting this morning is to review and discuss the draft adoption-ready actions. We'll be doing that very much in a workshop style. We have a couple of discussion points. One will just be talking about overall, sort of how they're structured, and some of the details of that. And then we'll go one by one through all 7 of the ARAs. Before we start that, I'll have a quick poll to get some ideas about your top 3 that you most want to discuss so I can figure out how to divide the time for our discussion. We'll fit a break in there somewhere. I haven't scheduled that on the agenda because we kind of put the whole discussion as one, but rest assured we'll get a break from the screen at some point this morning, and then we will wrap up and talk about next steps. Next slide, please. Maybe. Oh, no, I don't know where our slide went. Okay, we lost a slide. So before we get to the racial equity framework, let me just recap for you quickly the ground rules, which have disappeared. Okay. Well, I think you all, I'm going to crib for my memory. I think you all know, of course, because you've been acting on this, that we are here to focus on the issues at hand, to help DLCD understand your perspectives and think about things. We're not trying to build a consensus. However, we will highlight it where there is maybe some common ground or common thinking. But really, we most want to hear your broad and varied perspectives. And of course, as always, appreciate you keeping it the discussion focused on the topics, not on individuals. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Thea to work through the racial equity framework for decision making for today.
Thanks, Deb. And it seems like our slide deck got a little scrambled. Hi, everybody, though. It's great to see you back here to talk through the ARAs. It's exciting. It's an exciting step. But I wanted to, as usual, ground our conversation in the racial equity framework for decision making, focusing today on accountability and benefits and burdens. We can go to the next slide, Becky. Talk a little bit more about some of the details of what is within those questions. So when we talk about benefits and burdens, here are some of the ways to break it down. We can ask, what are the benefits and burdens of this rule? Financial, environmental, social. Who will benefit from this action? Who will be most burdened? How will the burdens be mitigated? And how might the benefits be redistributed? We're tasked with identifying possible unintended consequences and how we would mitigate these if we find them later down the road. So that's something that we need to do a little pre-thinking about. Analyzing and considering benefits and burdens for future populations as well. You go to the next slide, Becky. To talk about accountability. So how does the rule we're developing address accountability measures for both DLCD and local governments? What are the accountability measures for the local governments for this rule? So really thinking through how this might play into the areas that we're developing might play in the accountability program element. How will DLCD track compliance? And what are the incentives and disincentives for not meeting compliance? Do the accountability measures include engaging with communities? And if yes, how is this done? If no, really to think through why not. What are the challenges and opportunities for accountability for DLCD and for the local governments? And what are some ideas to address those challenges? And so having that sort of as the baseline for how we're thinking through what effects these ARAs might have, and how they work in different parts of the program is something that I want to make sure that we all keep in mind. We can go to the next slide, Becky. So we're talking today about adoption ready actions. We haven't been back here in adoption ready action land for a while. So I wanted to give us just to sort of reset us a little bit. As you remember, I think this slide is familiar. Action has a specific definition in OAR currently. It means a specific policy, code, program, investment, administrative measure, advocacy effort, or other tool included in the housing production strategy in alignment with the statute, I'm not going to read the number of, which commits to implementation. So we're building off of that to develop a definition for adoption ready action, which will sort of join its friend in OAR in the definition section eventually. Currently, the working definition, and it is very much working, is an adoption ready action is an action that's partially or fully developed and implementable. An adoption ready action is designed to reduce development resource needs while supporting the principles of Goal 10 housing. An adoption-ready action requires some elements of universal applicability, but the specific level of adoption readiness may vary, and this is something that we will see and talk about a lot as we're going through the ARAs. That level of adoption readiness and full immediate implementability is really one of the key considerations for how these actions might be used in the program and might help local governments do their housing work. We can go to the next slide, Becky. So if you remember, we categorized the long list of potential ARAs by development priority, with the green being recommended to draft now. There were a series of blue that are sort of promising and recommended to be drafted next. And finally, yellow, which means that there really needed to more research, sort of more legal review, and just a little bit more digging to confirm whether it's suitable to be developed as an adoption-ready action. The ones that rose to the top were supported, as you know, by conversations with the HOG, by a lot of research into promising practices, actions that other jurisdictions, other states have used, as well as supported by staff and consultant expertise and experience there. You'll notice that the ARAs we're discussing here are not land use actions, and you'll remember that those are currently under development as part of the model code. So there are ARAs that are land use actions, and this is important, but those are sort of being developed in a parallel track with the model code development, and we're going to be bringing those back to you for more discussion in June. So this set of ARAs largely focuses on those actions that are not specifically about land use. Trying to think if there's anything else I need to address here in this slide. I think we can move on and talk a little bit about the framework and the criteria that we used. Again, another familiar slide. We sort of narrowed in on which actions would be suitable for development into adoption readiness using these criteria. So aligned, the action is or can be targeted toward addressing relevant housing need or policy outcomes. It's currently legal under Oregon state law. It's local, so the action can be something that the jurisdiction can take and is in control of. It's effective, so there's some evidence to back up that it is an effective measure, that it has a measurable impact on the intended consequences. It's applicable to a range of jurisdictions, that it can be applied across the Oregon context, that it's durable, and so it's not going to sort of become obsolete quickly, and it will be impactful for the foreseeable future. We want it to be generalizable, so it can be developed in a way that that a government can really use it as an off-the-shelf tool, or at least to have off-the-shelf components. And finally, that it's valuable, that it will meaningfully decrease the burden on the local government. So that's it. You know, these are sort of key framing to think through which actions should be developed into adoption readiness, and you know, sort of in looking at the ARAs that we're going to be bringing you later on in this conversation. Do they, you know, do they really uphold this set of criteria? To review the framework quickly, you might remember level 3 means they are immediately adoptable and implementable. So these are the ones that are the most generalizable and complete. Level 2 means largely developed, but they do require some level of local development and local customization and sensitivity. Level 1 means that there are some sort of developed elements, but they really require substantial local preparation, meaning that the local government can borrow key pieces and build off of that. It provides sort of a foundation to build a local action. So with all of that sort of as background, we can move to the next slide. I don't remember what it is. These are the adoption ready actions that we will be talking about later in this conversation. These are the ones that were pulled out to develop in this round. You'll see that there's only one level 3 action, and I think that sort of is indicative of both sort of the, you know, how it shook out in terms of how many actions were actually deemed to be fully implementable if developed into this kind of ARA format. And also just to just an acknowledgement that there's, you know, there's a challenge in creating truly generalizable actions. And we'll go through each one of these again later in this conversation. Becky, we can go to the next slide. I don't remember what that is. Okay, so next steps for development. So we'll, after this conversation and going into the future, we'll continue to develop the ARAs. We'll be focusing on areas that have high impact potential and are actually useful to government practitioners based on all those criteria that we noted before, trying to continue to learn how to make them more generalizable and across a range of needs, you know, so if they can meet those localized needs, even from sort of a more standardized approach. Continuing to develop tool modules. So this is an important part that we haven't really jumped into yet, but thinking about what tools can be applied to support actions. And these are things like potentially like an affordability covenant or a density bonus. Those are tools that can be applied to different actions in different ways. And so developing out sort of a set of tools that live parallel to the actions. And finally, producing a sort of generalized legal sufficiency review, acknowledging that really any local action should be taken under advisement of the local government's own legal counsel, trying to figure out how, if we can do like a first layer of that. I didn't develop a slide for this next thing that I want to discuss, because it's actually it was confusing for me to think about how to do it visually, but just acknowledging that we've been talking about a whole bunch of different pieces that fit together. So, we're currently developing and revamping an HPS menu of actions. This is the big umbrella of actions that we're talking about that a city may take to implement within their housing production strategy. There are a variety of paths that we've been talking about to get there. So the base rules is what is currently written in rule, and that's the current structure of the HPS. We're talking today about adoption ready actions, which are a small subset of base rules. These function as sort of a tool for a city if they want to select something without having the burden of developing the action fully themselves. The ARAs can also potentially play a role in the acceleration program if a city finds itself sort of in a circumstance where they have not taken the actions that they need to take. These can be applied in conversation with DLCD in the acceleration program. The compliance pathways are sort of a different track, and I don't want to confuse us here. That's another way to get from the menu over to the HPS. And I, again, just want to make a note that the land use actions live sort of parallel to the ARA development, but are a part of the ARAs under model code. If I confuse everybody even more, apologies, and we can keep talking about it. But I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge that there's kind of a lot of moving parts here. We're talking today about this one path. I think, Becky, let's see if there's another slide on this. I think that is all. Yep, so we can pass it back to Deb to take us into discussion. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And I apologize all, I meant to do this at the top of the meeting, so I'm going to interrupt the flow for just a moment to do introductions. And then we can do clarifying questions in that first discussion together. So my apologies. As always, we'll introduce the DLCD team and agencies first. We'll introduce those of the consultant team that are here, and then HOG members, and then we'll carry on with the rest of our morning here. So I know you already met Thea, but maybe Thea, you could just give your title real quick, and then we'll carry on.
Sure. Thea Croman, housing planner with the DLCD.
Thank you. Celestina.
Good morning, everybody. Celestina Teva, she and they pronouns, housing planner, also here at DLCD.
Great. Ethan.
Hey everyone, Ethan Stuckmeyer, manager of the housing division at DLCD.
Ingrid.
Good morning, Ingrid Cordell, admin specialist for housing division here at DLCD.
Thank you. And I believe you all know this already, but just in case you forgot, Ingrid is the one you send a chat to if you're having any technical difficulties, and she'll help problem solve with you. Melissa.
Morning, everyone. Melissa Ahrens, Mid-Willamette Valley Regional Representative. I'm sitting in today for Josh LeBombard, another regional representative who's usually here.
Thank you. We're glad you're here. Joel.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joel Matson, use he, him pronouns. I'm the manager of the Housing Accountability and Production Office.
Great. And Aurora?
Good morning. My name is Aurora Jilla. I'm a legislative and policy analyst. I do housing and urbanization policy for the agency.
Sean?
Sean Edging, housing planner at the Housing Accountability and Production Office. Zoom wasn't cooperating with me this morning, so I joined by phone. Sorry for being a few minutes late.
It's just one of those mornings. Thanks for being here, Sean. Talia.
Hi, everyone. Talia Concrevis, she, her pronouns. I'm the Assistant Director of Homeownership Programs at OHCS. And I apologize be in and out today. I'm on my way to another meeting right now.
Well, thank you for being here. Svetha?
Hey everyone, Swetha Bhatti, she, her pronouns, Senior Housing Advisor in the Governor's Office.
Glad you're here. Thank you. And I think that's it for agency folks. Consultant team, Becky?
I am Becky Hewitt. I'm a project director with Echo Northwest.
Madeline?
Good morning, everyone. Madeline Miller, she, her, Senior Project Manager with Echo Northwest.
Thank you. And you all might have seen that Lorelei Gentinen with Echo Northwest was also here, and she'll be popping in and out this morning as well. So on to HOG members, and I'm just going to do this alphabetically by your first names. So to give you some fair warning, let's start with Anne, please.
Yeah, Anne Catlin, City of Albany, Comprehensive Planner. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ariel?
Hi, good morning. Ariel Kane, City of Portland, Economic Planner.
Thank you. Brianne?
Brianne Gale, Senior Long Range Planner, City of Bend.
Brock?
Nation Policy Director, Oregon Realtors.
Thank you. Dave?
Hi, everybody. Dave Oddie, owner and principal at Holst Architecture.
Good morning. Julia? Oh, I thought Julia was here. Did she pop off maybe?
Yeah, sorry, I am here. I'm having a lot of technology challenges
Oh
this morning.
gosh, it's that kind of day today.
Yes, yes, and Julia Metz with Sightline and Thousand Friends. Thanks.
Great. And I see that Gust popped in as well. Are you there, Gust? I think I got a note that Gus might be in and out this morning. So if and when he speaks, we'll have him introduce himself. Karen.
Morning, everyone. Sorry I'm late. My name is Karen Burig, and I am the Long Range Planning Manager at Clackamas County.
Thank you. Kathy.
Kathy Wild. I am with Housing Land Advocates, and I am an attorney who's retired, but I am still working on housing issues.
Really glad you're here. Thank you, Kathy. Mac.
Good morning, everyone. Mac Cunningham, housing developer at Community Partners for Affordable Housing. Sorry, I'm under the weather today, so I'll be off camera.
All right. So grateful you're here. Thank you, Mac. Mary Kyle.
Mary Kyle McCurdy with 1000 Friends of Oregon. I use she, her pronouns. I'll have to pop out between about 11 and 11:25, but I'll be back.
All right. That sounds good. Thank you. Sounds like Ingrid will be busy this morning. Michael.
Michael Anderson with Sightline Institute. Him or them. Thanks.
Thank you. Rachel.
Morning, everyone. Rachel Maury BG, she, her pronouns with Vanilla, the Network for Oregon Affordable Housing. Sorry, I am not on camera. I am driving.
Okay. Be careful out there. Thank you. And Shannon.
Shannon Billhauer, she, her pronouns, Habitat for Humanity of Oregon.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I think I got everyone. Let me know if I missed anyone. I think we're good here. Okay. And we'll pick up if additional people join us in a moment, we'll grab them as they come along. So thank you all for just taking a moment for introductions. Carrying on with our draft adoption ready actions, if you have clarifying questions and or comments, I'll direct you also to the agenda general questions. This first section will take a few minutes to just hear from you generally as a group of actions, these 7 with the model code. How well do they align with the policy objectives? Is there a structure that's helpful for understanding which housing needs? Is the structure helpful for understanding which housing needs are being addressed? Again, looking at the ARAs that we have in front of us as a whole. And then if you just want to talk more specifically about, the ARAs and what you're looking forward to and any sort of general concerns. And then we will have plenty of time to get into each one and dig into those. But if we could just keep it high level for a moment here, challenge ourselves, and then we'll get into the details. With that, anyone have any clarifying questions or thoughts you'd like to add about this set of 7 ARAs? How well they meet policy objectives, etc. Yeah, Brock, go ahead. Oh, Shannon, I'll come to you next, Shannon. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you. So less about any of the specific draft ARAs, more about the I guess formatting. So when we have the tables here, we have our description, impact, applicability. For impact, some of these are impacts on housing production. Some of them are, I guess, co-benefits or just other potential benefits of the programs. I think it would be good to see those separated out, not because I think our local planners are going to get confused, but when members of the public are looking into these things, I think it would be helpful for them to see whether or not something is specifically going to be impactful to production or if it's going to be more impactful for something like data collection. So just a general note that overall, I think it would be good to separate those two things out.
Okay, thank you. If others have thoughts on that, we welcome hearing some feedback on that as well. Shannon.
Yeah, thank you. I think I have some related feedback. First, I just want to level set and make sure I'm understanding. So this is like a sample group we're getting started with. Is that correct?
I think that's the way. Go ahead.
Yeah, Shannon. So this is sort of the first set. They're almost like a pilot, group of these, and depending on resources and sort of how well they achieve the goal,
Sure.
more will be developed.
Thank you. Okay, that's so helpful. And in that context, I think, from my perspective, perhaps related to feedback that Brock just shared, I wonder about also subcategories, like infrastructure tools, right? And that could include maybe adoption ready standards for the middle income revolving loan fund. It could include this is how you do LID, and these are some best practices for LIDs. And then maybe we'll have this revolving loan fund newly, right, through Business Oregon. But this is the bucket of infrastructure tools that cities can adopt. And then I feel like the system development charge bucket, again, I know we're in this moment of waiting for maybe some helpful policies to pass this session. Also, though, my heart is really in better aligning our SDC system to encourage density and middle housing and denser housing. So I know the city of Portland just took that progressive stance with SDCs for very low income housing. But for example, in most municipalities, if you're going to build a detached triplex, you're going to pay as much in SDCs as if you build 3 5,000 square foot homes. It's the same. And so we're accidentally financially disincentivizing smaller footprint central located homes through our SDC structure from my point of view. And then I wonder if there's a category around land availability, and something that I still think my worldview seems pretty straightforward to implement and so impactful is for a city to actually participate in land banking. So maybe not just a disposition of their own lands, but land is a hot commodity. And here's where there's a reasonably flat lot that could accommodate multifamily. We're just gonna pay for it now when it comes on the market and let a developer buy it from us. So those are a few thoughts for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you. So some thoughts about the gaps, and also thoughts about maybe how things could be organized or reorganized a little bit to be clear about the kind of tools we have at hand here. Anyone else have questions or thoughts about these ARAs? Yep, go ahead, Brock.
Sorry, I'll be quick. I think some of them could be written a little bit more generalizable. The two in particular that I'm thinking of are 2A and 2C, or numbers 2 and 4 in the table. So the affordable housing SDC exemption and the multi-unit property tax exemption. I think there's some ways to write that a little bit more broadly.
Okay, we'll get into those, I'm sure. Mac.
Thank you. And let me know if this is better for later or for now, but I do also have specific feedback on 2 specific error arrays. If we're waiting to go through them, I can wait for that. Which it seems like the answer is yes. So I'll hold
Yes.
on to those thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, let's just take a moment here, and we don't need to belabor this part. We can move on to that discussion, but I want to just give a second to talk generally about how these are structured. If are they clear to you? Generally, I'm hearing, I think maybe they are, given some of the comments anyway so far, is really looking at how to improve it and make it a little clearer, or sorry, make things a little more useful. Okay, seeing some thumbs up. All right. Last call on talking about these generally, and giving a moment for Ingrid to get prepared for her short poll here. Kathy, are you raising your hand? Maybe not.
Sorry, yes, I am. I'm having trouble finding the audio button.
You were applauding, so sorry, I was misunderstanding your reaction. Yes, please go ahead, Kathy.
I'm assuming we're going to go back to our conversation about how we're going to put these in the context of what are going to be either required or rebuttable presumptions, or just things to choose by category. So is that conversation one we're going to return to, because we're certainly not finished with it?
We will, Kathy, be returning to that conversation. This particular set of actions will not be part of what we will be considering for those compliance pathways. So those minimum standards or rebuttable presumptions, because those are now sort of narrowed to a focus on land use. So yes, we definitely will be returning to that conversation, but these particular actions are not going to be part of those that set of requirements. Celestina, jump in, please. I'll clarify.
Yeah, I'll just take a moment to maybe try and tease some of this out a little bit more. The adoption ready actions are really just a representation of an advanced level of guidance that the department is developing for a set of actions, regardless of when and where those actions are required. So the components that we have in our packet just represent tools, basically, right? Adoption ready tools, templates, things that local governments can use if they take any of these actions. Whether or not any of this particular set of actions, which have been developed a little bit further to or toward adoption readiness, are required or further incentivized or suggested with any compliance pathway, again, like Thea mentioned, is in many ways separate from whether or not we've developed additional guidance on how to do something in particular. So this is just the first pass of actions where we've been able to develop additional guidance, additional support, spend some resources, setting local governments up on how to actually implement something like this. We will return, like Thea said, to the conversation about compliance pathways and those actions as well. But I just wanted to offer maybe one additional verbalization of some of those distinctions.
And also, just to add, if you know, this is an important distinction and something that we can keep talking about. So if there are further questions, do not be shy. continue to feel free to ask us either, either here or in a different context. This work group is talking about several different elements of this program, kind of all at the same time, and it's confusing to everybody. So feel free to reach out. Feel free to put up your hand if clarification is needed.
Any other questions about the ARAs, how they work, if they're working, comments? All right, let's move on then. Discussion number 2. This is the sort of workshop-y part of this. We will go one by one through each of the ARAs and get some feedback from you. There are a set of questions we're especially looking for in the agenda. But before we go there, we have quite a bit of time available to us, but I want to make sure I'm breaking it up and focusing. We'll go through all of them, but let's do a quick poll, if you will, so I can understand where there's most interest, or if there are any in particular that you have most interest in discussing, so I can manage the time this morning. Ingrid is going to share a poll asking you which 3 ARAs are you most interested in discussing at today's meeting, and if you could note those 3, please. Take a moment here. Okay, I think we have everyone. Is there anyone still work? Okay, there's one more just popped in. Okay, if we could end the poll and share the results real quick. You all can see the results, yes. So I'm going to use this as sort of a cheat sheet of moving us along. Those with the sort of fewest interest, again, we'll still be talking about them, but I just sort of expect those might move more quickly. I'm definitely going to let us spend some time on that second one, and I want to make sure we reserve enough time for that last one as well. And of course, everything in between. I'm not suggesting we're skipping over anything here. So, all right, thank you for that. I think we can be done with the poll and moving on. And so here's how we've structured this morning. Becky is going to give a sort of thumbnail reminder about what each ARA is. So she'll start with that and some things to think about. We'll talk about that one, and then she'll set us up for the next one after. So we'll start with the nonprofit low-income housing property tax exemption. Take it away, Becky.
Okay, thanks, Deb. So the first one on our list is our only level 3 ARA, kind of most developed, most off the shelf, ready to go. The nonprofit low-income housing property tax exemption is pretty fully detailed out in statute. So we have provided a model ordinance, a model municipal code, an example of a letter that a city could send to the overlapping taxing districts, sort of providing some information about this tax exemption and seeking support for it from the overlapping taxing districts, and then also a model form that jurisdictions could use to have properties opt into the program. Although it is pretty well detailed out in statute, we did look at several local examples for sort of optional components that could be included in the municipal code in particular. Just if folks aren't familiar with it, this is an exemption that's specific to affordable housing owned by a nonprofit, and it can also apply to land that is held for future affordable housing development by a nonprofit. One of the few details that jurisdictions kind of, they don't have to make decisions about, but can, is the duration of how long land can stay in the program before development. There are also options to set some additional eligibility criteria beyond the ones that are in statute, but we don't see that happen very often. It's not particularly necessary in how you implement it. And the probably hardest thing about this program is getting support from the overlapping taxing districts, because it applies only to city taxes unless 51% of basically the tax rate, the taxing entities representing at least 51% of the total tax rate, provide support, affirmative support for the program. So that's the hardest part about kind of getting it implemented, is getting it beyond the city taxes. But this one is fairly straightforward. And yeah, there were a couple folks that wanted to talk about this one, so I'll be interested to hear what perspectives people have about it.
Great. Thank you, Becky. So we will have a discussion about ARA 3A here. And if you could, for all of these, I mean, it'd be great if you can help us understand what would make the action stronger or better or more usable. If you're left with any questions about how a city might implement it, that would really help us to refine these. And if you have other unique or interesting examples of case studies we should know about, or best practices, and if there's any implementation considerations that we missed, or are some of those unclear or need some additional items. So there we go. All right, Kathy, please go ahead.
I'm just curious as to why this is limited to nonprofits, as opposed to other real estate developers, because we're going to need more than just nonprofits to build affordable housing.
I see support for that.
Deb, I can speak to that a little bit. So the specific statute that this operates under includes a limitation to nonprofits. There are other options under statute for similar tax exemptions that are not limited to nonprofits, but they have time limits in them. This one is just sort of the most straightforward of the ones that are authorized under statute, and it's sort of a low-hanging fruit situation where even cities that maybe are hesitant about providing property tax exemptions, it's kind of the easiest thing to get political support for. It's nonprofits. Many people think they are already tax exempt and are surprised to find out that sometimes their developments are subject to property taxes. And so it's sort of a easy, low-hanging fruit one. There are certainly other options available under statute that are less restrictive. This one is just one of the clearest in statute. And if the ARA were to apply not just to nonprofits, it would need to be modified so that it aligned with a different sort of statutory set of parameters.
Celestina, do you have something more?
Yeah, and this will also apply for all of the adoption ready actions. And I just wanted to affirm that we have heard and do intend to develop the adoption ready actions in a way where the tool, so in this case, the property tax exemption, can be applied to various types of housing, or in this case, housing developers perhaps, but even, housing based on what is authorized, where there are limitations there. We weren't able to do that in this set of drafts, but just know that that has been heard, and please feel free to continue to name it where you see an adoption ready action that is developed with a particular scope and you think could be applied elsewhere, because that will continue to flag those places where we can make those distinctions and even at least name, where there are alternate statutory authorities to apply elsewhere that could be developed later, and really start to understand the tool as distinct from sort of how it's being applied. So thank you for the comment, Kathy, and please don't hold those back. Keep them coming.
Thank you. Mac.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, like, overall, I am really happy to see this adoption ready strategy. One of the holding costs are really just one of those big sort of initial development costs that we always have to carry that gets passed on through the budget and increases the cost per unit, as well as just like generally with how affordable housing funding is relatively limited here in this. Well, sorry, Oregon is in a better position than a lot of other states, but we're still not swimming in abundant affordable housing development cash. And in the grand scheme of things, it can take, in a good timeline, 5 years from initial concept to folks moving in the door. And so getting those exemptions during that period of time is really great to make sure that those additional costs don't get passed on affordable housing developers due to the constraints of the funding sources. We have subsidy limits. So if holding costs get too high, it can cause a project not to pencil, or it then eats into the eventual fee that a developer would be owned. And those nonprofit affordable housing developments, that developer fee is not only just used to cover the cost of staff, but since oftentimes development budgets cannot cover the cost of providing the required resident services, that developer fee gets recirculated back into those developments and communities to provide those services, and any sort of potential reductions in that fee from needing to eat more holding costs by not having this as an option impacts that ability, and then other gap finding sources are needed to cover those costs of services. And then the last thing, I kind of just wanted to add in a little caveat in terms of like the ownership, at least once a development for affordable housing is developed. If it's developed through the LIHTC program, which the vast majority of affordable housing units in the state of Oregon and throughout the country are financed via LIHTC, they are technically actually owned by a for-profit corporation that is a partnership between that nonprofit sponsor and the for-profit investor for those first 15 years. And so I just wanted to leave that caveat in there as well.
Great. Thank you, Mac. Appreciate that. And appreciate the support for this one. Gust, good morning. If you could introduce yourself as well and provide your comment or question.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, great.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My name is Gus Chachis. I am in La Grande, Oregon, affordable housing developer. Traveling today, and I'm sorry, prepping for another meeting coming up here shortly. I am just loving the discussion. I feel like a kid in a candy store because everything is relevant to my lens. Everything Max said, I was just like, high-fiving the whole time here. We are living this out right now. We're in the process of changing one of our affordable housing developments. By the way, they're all to this point veteran GHAP funded. And we've been partnering with the local housing authorities, and we found that that partnership isn't as comprehensive as we need it to be, but it functioned well because the property tax exemption that the housing authority brought to our 60% AMI and less, and in most cases more like 50%. And so now we are restructuring the partnership to be with another nonprofit, but the nonprofit to this date, to my knowledge, does not carry with it the property tax exemption, which is a heavy lift for the development. And so I just wanted to say I am affirming all of this momentum that we have in this area. I'm excited to see how it's received, because it's really it's one of the biggest obstacles that we're facing in our developments is how we can functionally do this. So I'd be excited to hear if there's any comments offline that others might have for us to make this more operate more smoothly. But I just wanted to throw that in there, that it is very relative, and I'm glad to see it discussed.
Thank you, Gust. Yeah, and thank you for giving the example that you're currently working through. Really appreciate that. Brock, I'm going to take you, and then I'm going to move us on to the next one, but go right ahead.
I think Anne had her hand
Oh,
up.
I'm sorry. She did have her hand up. Thank you. Anne?
Yeah, Anne Catlin, City of Albany. We have adopted these provisions, and I was just trying to research. I don't know if they've changed, but this is the one that is yes for nonprofits, but the LARHTE, the low-income rental housing tax abatement program, is something we're looking into because this the ones in 307.54 whatever through 548, there was a sunset date of 2020, end of I think 2026 or 2027 for this program, and it was 20 years. It wasn't 20 years, it was renewable every year, and every year to have the applicants apply and have to go to council every year is a little bit cumbersome, and there isn't that certainty. So we're looking to swap out with the low-income rental housing tax abatement program, which is available to nonprofits and for-profits, which there are many for-profits that are getting LAHTC funding. So I'm trying to research while other discussion is going on, but maybe ORS has changed and removed that sunset provision in these standards.
Becky, do you have some insights on that?
Just a quick follow-up that I'd have to go back, and I don't have the statute open in front of me right now, but I know it has been extended in the past. The sunset date on this one has been extended in the past. And I would say that requirement to reapply every year, my interpretation, and this might be something that's worth noting in the ARA, I don't think it necessarily has to require council approval every year. I think it can be more streamlined than that. And so that might be a specific way that Albany has chosen to implement this particular tax abatement that is not how I see all jurisdictions implement it. And so that might be something that we could touch on in this one in terms of the implementation considerations to keep that streamlined. And because what I've seen in other places is more of just it's just sort of like a pretty streamlined form to just be like, yep, we still meet the criteria each year. And it's not necessarily like a huge, big deal that requires a lot of effort. It is some effort every year, but it also in some ways reduces the need for staff it provides a mechanism to ensure that the property is still compliant year to year without the need for some other kind of enforcement mechanism. And so, but yeah, I think that's a good flag to clarify that if, maybe structure the program not to require a council level reapproval and a other taxing district reapproval every year, because that would be burdensome. I agree.
That'd be great if you can do that, because we have to notify the taxing, the tax assessor every year for these properties, and it's done by resolution. And so somebody in finance has to do all that. It is a lot of work. We actually don't have this cumbersome application process. It's just we do have to go to council with resolutions. And so I haven't researched what other cities are doing since we're considering a swap out. But yeah, if it can be done that way, that absolutely. And I think having some implementation suggestions is a great idea.
Thank you. Shannon and Kitty.
Oh, wants to participate too. Oh my goodness. Sorry.
So typical.
So I can speak to this for home ownership because we went and got the affordable home ownership exemption on land held for future construction. It is a simple form that we have to remember to resubmit prior to every April or pay a late fee. And part of the reason for that is that there's a clawback provision in terms of home ownership for if you don't follow through and do provide affordable home ownership opportunities. So there's some built-in accountability, but it's a very straightforward form. The only thing that we've encountered sometimes, I would say, cities do implement it and county tax assessors. And so sometimes we've had to help educate county tax assessors when there's a turnover in local staffing. And we did actually start out with that exemption having no sunset, but then the Revenue Committee decided to sunset all of them for consistency. So we do have to pay attention and advocate to renew them about every 10 years typically. Thanks.
Thank you. So maybe some additional thoughts for considerations there as well. Rachel, and then I'm going to move us on. Go ahead.
Thanks, Deb. One more thought for consideration, kind of going along with what Shannon says. And I have to say, I've been in lending for a while now and not on the investor side. So maybe Mac or Gust could provide some more insight if I'm incorrect. But when I was working on the investor side, if there was an annual application that needed to be approved for a property tax exemption, a lot of times the investor would not allow that exemption to be underwritten because it is, contingent. The exemption is contingent upon work that needs to be completed annually, and if there's a sunset, all the compliance period, a lot of times that property tax exemption will not be underwritten. So while when we're considering actual operations, the property tax will not be applied and it will help the property operations. Sometimes that can be a barrier to getting approvals or making the deal pencil on the underwriting side.
That's helpful insight. Thank you. And I'm guessing Mac has some additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, just following up. So I just ran into this on a deal that I closed in December of last year. And so we did have to walk that investor through how the Oregon system works, especially because they're a national big bank, monopoly bucks sort of situation. And so we just, in short, we just ended up having to have our counsel write an opinion about it. The bigger barrier I would actually say is the fact of the state of Oregon's 10-year property tax abatement that they allow, that the legislative session has to always, like, when your time frame comes up, they renew it. They've renewed it constantly over the past several cycles when it's come. That is technically, of course, not a foregone conclusion. But our council has typically been able to provide a letter speaking to that process and its impacts in the past, and that it has continued to be popular. But then we do kind of have to, for those investors, guarantee some sort of backfill that if property taxes were levied, that the nonprofit sponsor will step in to fund that. And that's how we get it included in the underwriting, to not have that as part of the operating costs there.
Okay, that's a big consideration to keep thinking about and helping cities figure out how to structure. All right, I'm moving us along. Thank you all. Moving us along, lots of interest in discussing the next one, 2A SDC exemption for affordable housing. Becky's going to line us out again, and then we'll get to the discussion.
Okay. Yes, this one, I expect there are lots of thoughts and feelings about this one. So for anyone probably not in this Zoom, but maybe folks out who might be watching this, system development charges being fees that some local governments charge to recover the impact of development on certain infrastructure systems. And the adoption ready action here is a policy-based exemption to those system development charges, specifically for regulated affordable housing projects. There are some different feelings about the legality of policy-based exemptions that are not backfilled by other sources. I am not a lawyer, but I have definitely heard both sides of that. A an adoption-ready action cannot provide a backfill source. So this would, if a jurisdiction, if their legal counsel interpreted the law that they would need to backfill, then the jurisdiction would need to figure out that backfill source for themselves. And this one is written, it's one of the things that can hypothetically be generalizable. We wrote it more narrowly for this version to start because this is, I guess, sort of the clearest, cleanest implementation of the exemption. Some places have exemptions for ADUs, or they have reductions for certain types of housing. There's that just sort of spirals into a lot of different considerations, a lot of different guidance that is needed. So for this sort of first, what I think of as like the starter pack of ARAs, this one is written more narrowly to focus on regulated affordable housing. But there is some guidance that notes that the jurisdiction can think about how to set the eligibility criteria for affordable housing. And one of the other considerations on implementation is if the jurisdiction applies this only to projects that have state or federal funding, and so they have kind of their own compliance mechanisms built in, then that doesn't necessarily, the jurisdiction can kind of rely on those built-in mechanisms to ensure that the affordability is being delivered as expected. If the jurisdiction chooses to allow the exemption for affordable housing that does not have state or federal or somebody else's money who is doing some compliance checking on their own, then the city would need its own mechanisms to get that affordability kind of baked in, a local covenant or similar. And they might need staff time to kind of keep track of that the projects are providing the affordable units that they have committed to. On this one, we looked at a number of different examples. We drew most heavily from programs in Bend, in Eugene, and in Salem on this one. But there is a pretty wide variety in terms of how this is implemented locally at this time. Certainly legislation could change things, but in terms of the examples we have to work from at this time, there's a pretty big range, and I will be interested to hear if folks feel like certain programs are more effective than others. I guess one note, I think Eugene is one of the ones that has some kind of moderates how much they are willing to exempt at any given time. And that is helpful to the city, but less helpful to folks who don't know if they're going to be able to count on that exemption. So that's one of the things we are aware of as a kind of trade-off here, and where we've put some guidance about it, could potentially put some more guidance to that. But yeah, we'll be interested to hear what folks think about this one.
Great. So again, questions and ideas about how to make this stronger, more usable, how a city would use this, case studies, and other questions. So go ahead, Brock.
Yeah, actually my only change on this one is just a one word. So on page 29 of the ARA packet, under the exemption section, and then I guess paragraph B, the kind of choose whether or not to incorporate in the gray highlight just has rental. I think we could just put a colon and then say owner occupied. It can apply to either. It specifies the requirements for both below that. So I think it just makes sense to make sure that both of those are represented there.
Great. Thank you very much. Mac.
Thank you. Unsurprisingly, I'm going to say I like this one. This is a great policy to help keep down the cost of affordable housing. There are two sort of implementation comments that I have more specifically, though. One is touching back on that Eugene example, that predictability is going to be critically important as we're putting together budgets and knowing if there is going to be a full exemption, a partial exemption, a sliver of an exemption, anything like that. The earlier we can know that and the earlier we can have the certainty of what that outcome is going to be, the better, so that way we can plan for it. Of course, in an ideal situation, it would be a full waiver, but perhaps in jurisdictions where there's a limited pot of money or a limited amount of income they're not willing to bring in, to put it differently, there could be some sort of prioritization matrix that is communicated out. Like if you have a certain percentage of family size units, you have PSH, you have lower affordability levels, like something that is a programmatic matrix that can be provided up front by that jurisdiction for whatever makes sense for them and their priorities, to help communicate to an affordable developer. If you hit these things, you will have that certainty of getting this SDC exemption. The second implementation comment I have is, so I dealt with a jurisdiction that has an SDC exception program. One thing I want to caveat that I wish had gone differently in terms of that jurisdiction's process is they did not provide me with the legal agreement and the covenants essentially with that SDC agreement until after the project's construction finance closing. Since we had closed on financing, the structure had now gone from just the nonprofit ownership to that LIHTC partnership between the sponsor and the tax credit investor, as I mentioned earlier, with how LIHTC deals are formed. We then had to go back out to all of the lawyers again to try to get their attention, to get eyes on the agreement, to get comments, their sign off before we can execute it. Any sort of documentation that is going to need to be recorded or levied on the project should all be front-loaded to be negotiated and circulated prior to construction closing, just to streamline that review. Lawyers in these deals, they're always looking at the deal that's immediately in front of them. And so once they've closed that deal, trying to get back in front of them, it caused a delay in that project and our startup. Like we'd closed on financing, but we couldn't start construction until this exemption was implemented and this agreement executed. And so just want to avoid situations like that and highlight the need to get all that legal stuff out in the beginning when all those lawyers are actually paying attention and responsive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mac. Any questions for Mac or? Okay, great. Julia, yes.
Kind of a question and then maybe thought. Will there be like additional kind of template materials or anything supplied with this one? Is that part of the workflow? And I can give some examples of what I'm thinking about if that's helpful. So having done a development with a city that had an SDC, it was actually a deferral, but same difference in terms of what I'm going to talk about. Set up, but they had actually never used it before. Just a couple of documents that I think were helpful for them that we were basically sourcing for them as examples. So the actual form, like the intake form related to the SDCs, the actual agreement, so kind of what Mac was just talking about, so template agreement in terms of just kind of this is legally what needs to be listed within something that everyone's going to sign. And then to Mac's point, I think also just want to reiterate that having those available for the developer to review as early as possible is really, really helpful. But yeah, that plus the actual like ordinance language that or code language that you have in here, I think would be valuable. But I can go back and try and dig through my past life and see if there was anything else that popped up there. But I just kind of want to emphasize it, especially with some of these kind of programmatic ARAs. I think there's a lot of like kind of support document templates that would be just like hugely valuable for jumpstarting some of these programs for certain jurisdictions.
Thank you. Becky, questions?
Just a quick note that the affordability covenants are, and Thea touched on this at the beginning, are important to support implementation of several of the ARAs. And we had aspired to try to provide something as an ARA on those. However, Echo Northwest is not a law firm, and our folks got a little squeamish about providing examples of documents like that. So that is something that I think we recognize is needed to support implementation at the local level, and are going to try to work with DLCD to see what support we can provide or what we can sort of chart as a course that, DLCD could work with lawyers or someone else to try to develop those. So we're aware of that need, and thank you for bringing it up, and to Mac as well.
And if I could,
Yeah,
oh
go
yeah, I
ahead.
was just gonna say, I mean, I don't know. I totally understand the legal concerns of not wanting to draft a legal document template. And so if it becomes like a little bit of a barrier to actually have like a template, at the very least, I think maybe some links to cities that have them. And then it is up to a city to decide if they want to source those. But again, that was literally all we were doing, was we literally sent this jurisdiction's Portland's agreement, and then they had their lawyers modify it. And so that was enough. But yeah.
Good idea. And even if sort of to your point about intake form as well, or outline of the agreement, even if we don't have that included, we could call out that those are things cities need to develop up front as a best practice. Great. Okay, Anne, please.
Yeah, thank you. I was just curious whether the jurisdictions you guys looked at, and we've done some of this research too, have a different funding source to backfill those waived SECs, because that's been our challenge in Albany. We have waived SEC fees for affordable housing just for parks, but convincing Public Works and transportation about those costs. And so we're trying to sell adoption of a CET, which we don't have, as a way to pay for the SDCs. So I'm just curious about that. And I think Corvallis, if somebody applies for funding for development to leverage LHTC, for example, through their CET program, then like the SDC fees aren't waived or something like that. I mean, I know there's a lot of different ways cities can structure stuff, but I'm just wondering if some of these cities are using other sources to backfill the lost revenue. We want this to happen in Albany, and we're just trying to get ADUs to even not have to pay SCC fees, but just curious if your research uncovered that.
Any insights to share?
I can just respond really briefly. Oh, Shannon, I'll definitely chime in with your experience as well.
Sorry. So I don't even want to say these words, but we've seen some research, right, that cities can provide an SDC waiver. We've received good friend John Van Lendingham that cities are on the hook to backfill an SDC exemption from some source, right? So like when cities had ARPA money, that was a nice time to get SDC waivers. That seems to be the prevailing legal opinion in the state. It's always golden if you have a city who reads that differently, or if they have adequate revenue on hand to backfill from a source consistently. But in terms of implementation, that's what we have found to be the obstacle.
I was just going to say that, if you want to read 200 pages about SDCs, there's a 2022 SDC report that Echo worked on with a couple other consulting firms, and there's a longer discussion of this, but the short version is that we did see examples on both sides of this. There are certainly jurisdictions that do not have a formal backfill source. And there are others that, as Shannon was saying, that their city attorney's legal opinion is that it absolutely must be backfilled or they cannot do it. So we have seen both things. And among the jurisdictions that do backfill, I think CET is a common one, but it's not the only one. I've also seen urban renewal used to backfill in some cases, at least hypothetically. And I'm sure there are other sources as well, but there are definitely some jurisdictions, and I won't name names, that just forego the revenue, and that's how they've implemented it.
All right, other questions, ideas for improvement, thoughts on the SDC exemption for affordable housing 2A action? This is the one you all said you wanted to discuss. Maybe we've surfaced the significant issues already. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. And if we have time at the end, we can always circle back to any of these if additional questions come up. And of course, you can always email the DLCD team as well. So Becky, let's go to 2B, SDC deferral related.
Yes, related, but not the same. So also still talking about system development charges. So same general context here. Deferral meaning specifically still collecting the SDC, but collecting it at a different point in the development process. So there's a range of times that jurisdictions are allowed to collect SDCs under statute. The most common right now is at building permit issuance. So deferral in this case would typically mean allowing developers to pay at certificate of occupancy or later in some cases. Sometimes it's also at, say, final inspection. So this is also one where there are different ways that this is implemented at the local level today. I'm aware there's some legislation floating around out there that has some concepts about this. We will see kind of where that all lands. But in terms of jurisdictions that we have to draw from today, there's a range. I would say most of the jurisdictions that do this today do it on it's a formal, you apply to defer, there's some sort of a lien or other enforcement mechanism, you agree to the payment timing, there's some process involved, and that's the predominant way that I'm aware of these being implemented. Again, if you want to read lots and lots about it, there's a longer discussion in that 2022 SDC report, which I'm happy to link folks to if they're not familiar with it. But there is also at least one example, Tigard, which was one of the ones we pulled from for the ARA, where the SDCs are simply due later. They are due at certificate of occupancy, and there's not a process and an application and a lien and all that. It's just, that's when they are due. I'm aware of some jurisdictions having a lot of concerns about deferral and the risk of non-payment. Again, there's more discussion of that in that 2022 report, but the short version is we talked to quite a few jurisdictions for that process that have implemented this. We heard some what seemed to me relatively minor issues where there was a kind of arbitrary timing, like you can defer it for specifically 12 months that wasn't tied to a development milestone. Those sometimes needed reminders, but aside from that, it was mostly sort of the amount of work required to like put a lien on the property and that sort of thing that was challenging. And so that feedback that we had heard during preparing that report is part of why the ARA has sort of two options. One that is an application-based system where it is deferred, with a lien, with a whole process, and the other where it simply says SDCs are due at this time at certificate of occupancy, or in the case of water, when the water meter is installed, because that is the least staff effort involved. And I recognize that some jurisdictions will have concerns about that. Again, I think that's something that it's why we provided two options, and this isn't in the context of an ARA not being mandated, just being offered up, but we provided those two pathways and some discussion of the trade-offs between those. And we did generalize this one a bit more than what we had in the previous version, that it could apply to specific types of housing, or it could apply to affordable housing if it's not getting a full exemption, or it could apply to all housing. And that's one of the kind of key decision points for jurisdictions to think about, is the sort of trade-offs of multifamily housing is typically deferring a larger dollar amount, but you're getting more units per. If you're going to do it with like a lien and the whole thing, you're the amount of staff time per unit that benefits is a better ratio. Whereas if you're doing it for single detached, it can be kind of a lot of work to process them all individually. So those are some of the considerations that we touched on here. And I look forward to hearing experience from folks who have operated these programs on how this ARA could be improved.
Thank you, Becky. Shannon.
Yeah, thanks. Just love everything about this. And I think I wanted to weigh in here and strongly encourage adoption for what I would call middle income home ownership development for these SDC deferrals as well. So, that could be up to 130% AMI. I think if we're going with the governor's housing production work group, if I recollect, frequently 120% AMI other places, but in these times with prices what they are, I would recommend going up to 130% AMI. I'm just thinking about the high interest rates that contractors are contending with, whether for-profit even more frequently than nonprofit, because sometimes we can generate the revenue before we start building, and not having to carry the interest is a huge benefit for getting some of these entry level, especially I think homeownership opportunities off the ground. So I love everything about this, and I'm so glad to see it here. Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks for the ideas for maybe offering up some other options. Mac.
I want to echo that. I am also happy to see this. I mean, of course, a full exemption would be great, but if that's not possible, a deferral also would be favorable. I just want to up Shannon's comments about decreasing construction loan interest that needs to be carried. The further back in the project that can be shoved, the cheaper that interest is, et cetera, and that helps keep down project costs. The one thing, and this is a question that I've asked the representative who has brought this bill before the legislature about, but haven't gotten an answer, which would be useful for staff to hopefully be able to look into, is if the deferrals for SDC occur after a certificate of occupancy is issued, are they still able to be included in LIHTC basis? So to back up a second, for folks who aren't familiar, in the low-income housing tax credit program, LIHTC, the equities benefit are generated through basis. Basis comes through certain project costs that an accountant says, yes, this gets to count. It gets more complicated than that, but simplifying it. And essentially, usually the pivot point for where a project cost no longer is basis eligible is at certificate of occupancy and once the building has been completed. And so if the deferral is not paid until after that certificate of occupancy, there could be a chance where that deferral makes so SDC expenses are not able to be included in LIHTC basis and not generate equity towards the project. So I don't expect you all to have an answer to that today. That's a tax credit attorney who's going to have to answer this, of course. But being able to provide that sort of guidance, or just, I'm not thinking of the exact word right now, but at least getting that information in front of an affordable developer would be really useful, to have them either know offhandedly how it's going to go, or for them to then do the calculation to determine, okay, is the construction loan interest of these SDCs going to be greater than the net equity I lost in LIHTC basis, and letting them get to kind of figure that out. And that's kind of my only flag within this item. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm seeing there's at least, at very least, an opportunity to add into considerations this sort of timing of when that deferred payment is made. Anne, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say that the city is planning to implement this, and we probably should have by now, but for all residential units and not income restricted, because there's a variety of needed housing types and aren't necessarily all income restricted. But I see it could be a way to incentivize accessible or other housing. But if we're going to offer the program, we assume not everyone's going to, take us up on that offer. We were just going to offer it for all residential. So there was a carrot for everyone, and then save the SDC exemptions or the CET funds for the truly needed housing types.
That's helpful. Thank you. Thanks for bringing some ideas about other housing types that may also be struggling to get to feasibility here. Brock.
Yeah, just going to throw a big +1 on the comments from Anne and Shannon in particular, talking about how this might need to go up to 130. If any of you hadn't seen it, there was an article yesterday in the Oregonian talking about a guy from Oregon, 29 years old, who is now sailing to Hawaii because of the cost of living. And a quote from the article, you can be making 150,000 a year and you still feel like you're just making ends meet. People are tired of working really hard and feeling like they're not getting anywhere and they want a way out. I know that is not specific to this ARA, but I just wanted to use that to reinforce the point that they were making.
Great, thank you. Gust.
Yeah, thank you. Just the same with Anne and Shannon's comments. As an overarching comment and the quick note that Brock just brought, I think the answer that we're all looking for is yes, let's create more housing. And so for me, as we look at dissecting whether it should be deferred or whether it should be just removed, yes is the answer. And let's try to affirm the decision making to move forward really at any expense. I feel like I know that causes unintended problems and whatever as we get to a point, but I feel like we're a ways away from causing really substantial unintended consequences. And I heard the 4 or 5 year time frame mentioned to get a housing livable. And I used to kind of smirk at that, but as I am now into my 3rd and 4th development, I'm like, it's not too far off. And so, we're talking about the kind of generational shift in what a young adult or a child experiences today. And so I feel like let's get on the top side of this equation, and then we'll start to kind of back off and say, okay, well, we're getting closer now. So just kind of my greedy developer over accentuated opinions. Thank you.
Oh, gosh, thanks for the humor in there too. Appreciate that. Team, any questions or comments on anything you just heard?
Really great discussion. Thanks, everybody.
Great. I think now would be a good time to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and work through the last 4 adoption ready actions, and we can circle back as time allows. And I think, if things continue, we're definitely on track to end well in time to give time to all of these. So let's break until 10:40, please. See you in a few. All right, back from break. Welcome back, everyone. I will assume you all are there and we will carry on. I want to plan for somewhere like 15 minutes apiece with a little extra left for the last one. So with that in mind, let's get rolling. Becky, I think we're on to 2C, multi-unit property tax exemption.
All right. So switching gears from system development charges to back to some property tax exemptions. This one is also it's one of the property tax exemptions that is authorized under statute for local adoption. It is called MUPD more than it is called other things, but it is called lots of different things in different cities. Salem calls theirs MUTIP. I don't remember what everybody else calls theirs, but there are a number of different programs out there that all are operating under the same statutory authority, but they look pretty different. And that's partly because the statute in this case is fairly flexible and leaves a lot of local discretion, which is different from many of the other property tax exemption programs that are available under statute. So among the things that the local government can decide are where it should apply. There are some statutory guidelines on where it can apply unless it is specifically attached to housing that has an affordability restriction of agreement of some sort, but that's not the use case that we have developed into an ARA here. And I'll come back to that in a second. So there's a geographic component with some statutory guidance, but also a lot of room for interpretation of what words like core mean for your city. The jurisdiction has to set a minimum number of units, but that can be as low as 2. So it's quite flexible. And then there's a sort of broad public benefits component of this. And overall, the tax exemption is intended for housing that would not be possible but for receiving the exemption. But jurisdictions approach that in different ways. Some require a pro forma to be submitted that is, shows specifically like, look, here's a gap, and unless I get this tax exemption, I can't make this pencil. Some just, sort of make an overall finding when they implement the program that these are public benefits that are, where the public benefit would not be provided but for this program, and that the value of the public benefit is commensurate with the value of the exemption. So there's a lot of variability in how it's implemented. Like the nonprofit affordable housing one that we talked about first, it applies only to city taxes unless other taxing districts affirmatively support it, which is, again, one of the hardest things about getting it implemented in a useful way. It can be, if you do get that overlapping taxing district support, it can be a very powerful incentive. And so this is one where, because of the flexibility and because of that, how valuable that incentive can be, calibrating the benefit requirements is pretty important. This is one where we wrote it to be sort of one specific use case, but then provided some information about how it could be applied more generally. The specific use case that the ARA addresses is for housing that provides accessibility above and beyond the minimum requirements. There's reasons for that, but this is partly that way on the assumption that the sort of easy adoption ready version of this is only would be to apply it only to city taxes, because getting it applied to everyone's taxes takes more work. And so the sort of easy button version is not, most cities represent less than half, and in some cases more like a third or even a quarter of the total tax rate. So it's not a full tax exemption, even on the portion of the property that is exempt, if it's only city taxes. And because of that, sort of, we're assuming in this ARA that it might apply to only that city share. We didn't want to put affordability requirements or too many other things that might not balance out with that city tax exemption only. But we did try to provide some guidance about other ways that this tax exemption can be used. I would say because of variability in market conditions, I think that if a jurisdiction is going to implement this for mixed income housing, let's say, that it probably would require local calibration. And so that's one that might be more guidance than a different ARA about how to approach that calibration process. So that's why this one is sort of written in this sort of more narrow targeted way right now, with some kind of hints about how it could be implemented more broadly. We'll say just one other thing. The examples that we drew from for this specific one were ones where they had at least touched on accessibility as one of the public benefits that was eligible. Many, like Portland's as an example, is very different. It's tied to their inclusionary program. It's only available to inclusionary. It's a very different program. We'll also note Eugene should be on here as an example, but it is not what we use to inform the ARA, because they have a whole council process. It's very discretionary around deciding whether to offer the exemption, and that is not the version that we felt was appropriate to develop as an ARA because of the amount of sort of discretion and effort and program that goes into it. So that's kind of how we set this up. It's primarily model municipal code that we developed at this point in a model ordinance. And yeah, we'll be interested to hear what folks think about what could improve this one.
Great. Thank you, Becky. And thanks for pointing out the sort of use study from Salem and Cottage Grove that are emphasized here, and the flexibility of this as well. So questions, thoughts on how to make this stronger, better, more usable? Brock.
Yeah, I have two comments on this one. The first, just in the description, at the end of that first paragraph, if we could just take out the words "to qualify for the abatement." This is talking about the non-residential portions of a development. I don't know if this conflicts with the authorizing statute. I have not had a chance to review that, but if it doesn't, I think that last sentence of the first paragraph of the description should just say the exemption does not apply to any non-residential portions of the development unless the non-residential component is a required feature of the development. I don't think having that to qualify for the abatement piece is necessary there. And then the other piece I have on this one, and this is on page 44 of the ARA packet, under the purpose section, and then paragraph B there. Currently, only that kind of last half of that sentence is in gray. I think basically everything other than meeting the legislative goals set forth in 307-600 should be gray. Just to expand how broadly this can be applied. For example, if you are building something within a CFA, right? Not to say that you should necessarily take away the accessibility, that's, a local decision, but there might be instances where this is helpful in situations where they're basically going to have that ground floor commercial in order to be able to put the development in. The kind of description on the one-page table at the beginning of that, says it can be applied to other uses. I think just making it clear that other than meeting the intent of the statute, this can be used more broadly would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Celestina.
Yeah, Becky, jump in if I'm missing something, but I think to your first point, Brock, just to bring some clarity on that language on the description on page 37 and that last sentence. I think the reason to qualify for the abatement is if, as you were just talking about, sort of the public benefits required a non-residential portion in order to even have any portion of the project have abatement, then that would also be eligible for abatement. Like if mixed use was the requirement for eligibility, then the non-residential portion could be eligible. But if it was not required for qualification, then that would not be eligible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the clarification on that. Kathy, go ahead.
This is the only one that we've talked about so far that addresses accessibility, and it doesn't give a sense of how many more accessible units would be required. I know you're trying to give the city's discretion, but some of the other tools we've talked about could also be used for accessibility. And this one, I think we need a number, and we need to figure out what is more accessible than what is required by statute, either federal or state. And the notion that it can just be 2 units means you're not going to get much bang for your buck in terms of accessibility. So I have some concerns. I think we should either tighten this or broaden other lures like the other taxes.
Kathy, with your comment, I guess it maybe others already know the answer to this, so apologies. It makes me wonder whether if it's only 2 units, is the exemption only for the value of those 2 units, or is the exemption on the entire property, or what is sort of the way other cities have handled this? Go ahead, Becky.
So the exemption applies the exemption is the exemption regardless of, it doesn't only apply to certain units, it's applied to the whole project regardless of what the eligibility criteria are. Kathy, I guess we can talk more about how the accessibility requirement that's implied in or the sort of pre-baked version that's in here, which is up to a jurisdiction, would apply. But one consideration is for trying to make it scale down to a 4-plex level, so that if you have a 4-plex that is under the building code requirements that trigger type B units, that this would still scale down to that level and say, okay, if at least, let's say it's a 2 units up, 2 units down, 4-plex. And we were thinking through other situations where like maybe it's a different configuration, but they're still subject to the building code. And so they still have to do some type B, basically that they're sort of upgrading, if you will, at least one of those units from being type B to being type A. And so that's partly why it kind of can go down to that relatively low level, is to make it as broadly applicable to that sort of middle housing and smaller development space as possible.
Go ahead, Celestina.
Yeah, I was actually maybe after hearing Becky's comment, wondering if you had any thoughts on that, Kathy, any response?
The need is so great that I am concerned that if this precious exemption is given to small projects, we're not going to have the level of accessibility we need anywhere, which is why I would encourage us not to limit it and not to just give it, not to let people who are only doing a fourplex get it in order to net one more fully accessible unit. That doesn't seem worth the trade-off of what the exemption brings. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Kathy, and I welcome others to provide thoughts along those lines as well, because I know this is something that team's going through. Go ahead, Shannon.
Thanks. And I'm so sorry. I'm going to need to step away in a couple of minutes. I certainly appreciate this conversation. I wonder if we could think about toggling this exemption towards an overall percentage of units. Because Kathy, I'm actually feeling like that same argument can go to even like multifamily 1-bedroom units, right? Are we comfortable with that standard being 20%, knowing that there might be some trade-offs in number of resulting units, right? If they need to be a little bigger to have adequate turnaround space in a bathroom, for example. Just even with that, like fourplex idea, like if half of them are accessible, do we feel better about it? Does it need to be 3/4? Those are just my thoughts for what it's worth.
Thanks, Shannon. I appreciate you offering those thoughts. Brock, some additional thoughts? Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
Deb. I was
Yeah,
just
go
going to
ahead,
ask
Becky.
if it would help to throw the actual the language in question on screen for folks and to talk a little bit more about sort of what the starting point is and sort of why we picked that starting point. I'm happy to let Brock go first though, and I can do that in a moment.
Along the same lines as what Kathy and Shannon were just talking about, and feel free to pull it up while I'm talking. The thing I was going to say is I think that trade-off is something that needs to be decided at the local level. We do have a lot of tools that can be used to, like we mentioned, a lot of these could be used in various ways to help with accessibility. But if applying this to a minimum number of units to have one be accessible, that is still one more than we would get if it didn't apply. And so whether or not it's necessarily, I think, what any one of us might consider ideal is not where we should be going with this. I think this is a decision that needs to be made by the local government to determine whether or not that trade-off for the tax exemption is worth it. One more accessible unit is one more accessible unit, and we need all of them that we can get. So I would not recommend putting a lower unit count minimum on this.
Becky, do you want to just line us out real
Sure.
quick and then I'll.
Yeah.
If possible, I'm sorry, Becky, just to
go
sort
ahead,
of frame up the remainder of this conversation. I just want to try and keep clear, which it's very understandable that it's not always clear, but keep clear that these adoption ready actions as we're drafting them right now at the moment in the context of this conversation are not, they don't have, this conversation is guidance. So I think that I just want to offer that there, are other spaces of the program where we're talking about compliance pathways, where there may be requirements or rebuttable presumptions, where there's more, or safe harbors, where there's more of a compliance factor there. But with regard to guidance, I think the sort of open discussion about what might be most effective to achieve these policy goals without that lens is also helpful. And all of that information could be provided in this next sort of development of these adoption ready actions, where the focuses, the public benefits, if we want to use that term, are fleshed out a little bit more. So digging into this one a little bit more for accessibility is what I mean. Makes a lot of sense. And the information that we glean sort of about the trade-offs or about different approaches to incentivizing accessibility with this tool or any others, we can sort of apply with that accessibility module. Like if this is something the local government is trying to focus on, you might consider doing it in this way. So hopefully that helps for today's discussion.
Yes, it's all for local consideration and optional. Becky, do you want to tell us about
Sure.
this real quick and then I'll move on?
Yeah. So I'll just say briefly, so the way that this is structured right now, and this is, jurisdictions can decide, they can modify this. But the way that it is structured right now is that at least 10% of units on the ground floor and any upper floor that is, and any upper floor that's served by an elevator must be accessible units, no less than 1 unit. Accessible units in this context is defined further up, meaning type A under the building code. And the reason that it is set up this way, and I think Celestina's point that we can, there's more we can do through not just this one ARA to sort of clarify what the best way to structure a sort of incentive for accessibility is. But the reason it's written this way was that in most cases, ground floor units that could be in a situation where this could apply, the ground floor units are already going to have to be all of the ground floor and any upper floor units served by an elevator are already going to have to be type B. So providing an incentive for more type B units doesn't necessarily make sense because there might not be any more units that can be type B because they're not, they're not at grade, they're only accessible by stairs, etc. So instead of focusing on trying to get more type B units, because that might just not be, might be a physical impossibility, we focused on basically getting type A where you would have gotten type B. So getting a higher level of accessibility than you would otherwise have gotten. We didn't want to make it a percent of all units because it depends on the shape and size and ground floor. There's like too many variables to be able to set, like it's got to be 5% of units or 10, like what if the units, we just wanted to make sure it was physically possible in all instances. And so structured it so that basically it would apply to units that would already be type B requirements and getting to some percentage of those. And again, 10% is in there as a placeholder, but some percentage of things that would otherwise have been type B are instead type A. And then, so it does scale up with the, size. So a 100 unit development with an elevator, it would not be 1 unit. It's just, it's at least 1 unit so that when you scale it down and down and down, it's clear that even a 4-plex, this is still like, I still need to get to 1 unit. You can't round 10% to 0. So that's why it's set up that way. Now, let other folks share their thoughts.
Thank you for the clarification. Appreciate that. Anne.
Yeah, thank you. So Albany has been working on the MUFTI and hopefully that'll move forward. We have been having problems with other taxing jurisdictions, so I did like that you highlighted, I'm encouraging, let's just move forward, at least get the city taxes and Benton County. But one of the things that I feel is a little problematic is that we have too many public benefit options and how to, you might just have a comment that cities might want to be strategic with the number and type of public benefits so that they're really getting what they really need. There's some, we've done, well, it's economic development. They've done some research, but I've reviewed a lot of it. And our consultant who was looking at this as a housing tool kind of made that comment. And then the second thing that I would bring up is that we are trying to figure out how to get council to approve the program and the criteria, but not have to go to council every single time. Make it more of a consent agenda resolution, but just sort of to streamline that approval process, because there's a clock ticking on the approval process. So yeah, anyway, I just didn't know if other cities have done that, but just thoughts for consideration and how to, streamline. Once you meet the criteria, can staff just approve these and then, move, you're good.
Thank you, Anne. Helpful additions for consideration for cities to make this easier to use and hopefully more impactful. All right, I'm going to move us along and just so we can keep going and get through all of these. Next one, 1I, rental housing license program.
Okay, so rental housing license program. This is something that cities can do to effectively establish a requirement that if you operate own or operate rental housing within the jurisdiction, you have to obtain some sort of license or you have to register your properties. And that at a minimum allows the jurisdiction to have a handle on what housing is being rented in that jurisdiction. It can also be tied to other components like an inspection program. It can provide at a minimum contact information for landlords, which can be helpful if you want to distribute information. Sometimes it collects emergency contact information or things like that. So this is another one where there's a lot of variability in how it's implemented at the local level. There's some information included in the packet about the inspection component in particular and how to structure an inspection program in a way that on balance supports the renters living there and doesn't exacerbate the potential for displacement risk for those renters at sort of the extreme end of that program where the housing is really failing the inspections and you're into a situation of what does enforcement look like. So partly because of those nuances around how to operate an inspection program, this ARA does not include that. It stays a little more basic. There's discussion about things you might think about, points to some of those resources if you want to think about putting an inspection program component. But the ARA itself is kind of more of a entry-level version of a rental housing licensing program that's more focused on collecting some basic information and it has an option to collect information on type A and type B accessible and adaptable units within the property. So this is one other place where it sort of touches on accessibility just as a way to help jurisdictions sort of get a handle on the inventory that they have. And the contact information itself is partly to help provide a venue and a mechanism to put information out to landlords about trainings that are available or information that is available or a reminder, here's the renter protection things, and to be able to distribute information that might help support appropriate implementation of renter protections that exist at the state level or any local renter protections that a city might put into place. So we looked at several different programs to develop the model. It's actually not a model ordinance, it's model municipal code. Sorry for that typo. But we drew mostly from Gresham, Eugene, and Salem. Again, we did not include components related to inspection from any of those programs. We just took the kind of information gathering and applicability types of pieces and thinking about things like when does it renew? Is it transferable? And some of those mechanics are sort of taken from those three examples. And And I guess the one other thing to note, there's the applicability, I think, is one of the things of like, should it apply to affordable housing, or are there enough requirements on affordable housing that maybe, and enough ways of knowing that you have affordable housing that it would be exempt. In some cases, the affordable housing is covered by the program, but they don't pay a fee. So I guess I'm interested in perspectives from folks in the affordable housing universe about the relative burden of being incorporated into a licensing or registration program at the local level. And then there's also questions about things like, owner lives on site, or it's an ADU in their yard, or they only have one rental, sort of at what threshold do people kick into being subject to the program. So we'll be interested in, I have no direct experience applying one of these programs, and would be interested in perspectives from folks who do have some experience with this type of a program.
Thank you, Becky. So opinions on some of the questions Becky just posed. Any questions you might have or ways to make this better? Brock, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is the only one in the packet that I have real concerns about. And so I want to make just a couple things clear. One, there was a rental licensing program that was proposed in the legislature this year, and they shut it down, realizing that it was not going to be beneficial to actually getting more supply in. This adds operating costs to housing providers, and that is going to get passed on to tenants. So this does not actually increase affordability. It decreases it. It does not have a production impact. This is the one that kind of triggered that thought for me of, okay, we need to separate out the benefits from the production impacts, because saying this is low impact, yeah, it helps provide data, but the actual housing production impact is either zero or negative just from the program itself. The data might inform different decision-making at the local level, and that's one thing, but this program specifically wouldn't do that. Additionally, it just creates more challenges for housing providers because they have to, incorporate all this information. If we want to do something to get better data, I would recommend something like a HPS cycle census, right? And instead of saying, hey, you're going to pay a fee so that we can get this information, right? You say, hey, we're going to give you 10% off of your local business tax liability, right? And that's an incentive to get people to participate in it. But it doesn't actually add a operational requirement. The other thing that I want to say for this one is that the inclusion of information on rent and rent charges is really, really problematic. Specifically, there was another bill this year that some tenant groups brought forward about concern over software systems that help, evaluate what a reasonable market rate is for an area, for an apartment based on, size characteristics, et cetera, et cetera. The reason that they wanted to get rid of this software is because they were concerned that data being available to landlords was causing essentially collusion and price fixing. If this is publicly available information that they are reporting on, that just creates an even more abundant opportunity for that. The software systems don't actually work that way, but if this is public data that any landlord can then go in and look at, it decreases all incentive for competition because they see, okay, here's what people are charging for this. That's what I'm going to charge. So generally, I don't think this is the right way to solve the issue that it's trying to address. I would recommend this one not be included at all, but at minimum, that information on rent and rent charges just cannot be here. I did try to get Multifamily Northwest to come in and talk on this one a little bit. They were not available today, but they do have substantial concerns with this one as well. So I just wanted to flag that for you in case you want to bring them in as a subject matter expert or in case you get any outreach from them about this one.
Thank you, Brock. A couple of potential unintended consequences you've highlighted in your concerns, duly noted, and really welcome others of you here, especially I think a lot of folks had to jump off to other meeting. But those of you here who have managed properties or built properties, I think your perspectives would be really helpful, including Mac. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Yeah, with this one, I'm really torn. I'm pulled in multiple directions, from my experience and understanding about property management and how those sorts of systems work. My agency, we don't do property management directly. We contract that out, and so I want to give that caveat. And then also torn in the other direction in terms of like kind of what is the goal that's trying to be achieved. This sort of program that I'm thinking about, I am admittedly thinking as well about a program that the city of Baltimore implemented around when I was living there before I moved out to this neck of the woods. Um, and to a certain degree, like I do see the concerns about a net decrease in units. But I guess it also comes paired with the question of if some of these units that would come offline are coming offline because they can't pass inspections because they're not meeting certain quality of life and health and safety standards. Do we want people living in those units? Like that's just like such a difficult question. Even if it means they won't get to live in those units, but housing prices go up. Like that is such a difficult knot to disentangle. And so I don't have a full answer on that right now. But when it comes to the operation side, property management's not my favorite. Um, in terms of the agencies, we have a real problem in this state in terms of the lack of property management entities, and staffing those entities is really hard. Paying a livable wage for those providers is really difficult. And so attracting the type of talent for long-term retention for smooth operations is really difficult. They already have to do a lot of paperwork for affordable housing, way more than you have to in a market rate development. And so adding another layer cake on top of that brings me some hesitation. One sort of caveat that I would hope gets carved out is those units that have vouchers and not needing to go through an additional inspection process. Those already have to go through an inspection process from the local housing authority upon unit turn. And so scheduling 2 inspections for a unit feels very redundant. And then the last item within that I'm really thinking about is, at least in the City of Baltimore program, and I think this may have been proposed in the packet, but I can't remember off the top of my head, is in terms of inspections, providing like a verified third-party list that is independent, and then the landlords, property management entities get to pick from that just to try to create an arm's length distance. The last thing you would want is, I'm property manager, my friend Joe is an inspector. I hired Joe to inspect my units and he gives me a pass. I don't think that is a goal. And so ensuring that arm's length would be important. And I had another thought and it's left my brain because I'm not feeling well. If it comes back, I'll bring it up, but thanks.
Thank you, Mac, and thank you for highlighting some of the trade-offs involved with a program like this. Celestina and Becky, I'm guessing you have some thoughts or insights to share before we move along here.
Ooh, actually, really quick, I'm so sorry, that thought came back into my brain. One is also within the program, there should be some sort of incentive if you're a good landlord and a good property manager. If your units are constantly passing inspection, space out those inspections for larger durations. You should not have to punish folks who are doing a good job and creating that additional burden. If a landlord is trekking into slumlord territory, just to be a little more flippant about it, they should have more inspections more frequently if that is the direction that the state ends up going, but not creating those burdens for folks who are upkeeping their properties and being responsive to their tenants' needs. Thank you.
Just to tack on to Mac real quick about that, there's a lot of law around tenant habitability already in statute, and I don't know exactly which one would provide remediation for that, but if I had to make a general assumption, I would almost guarantee that something like that does exist in some form already.
Thank you, Brock. And just a reminder, this is all guidance and optional for cities to implement, but we want to make sure we're giving strong guidance here. Celestina or Becky, I'm not sure which of you wants to jump in here.
Mine can wait until Anne has shared his, not specific in response to a comment that was just made. So Anne, if you wanted to go.
I was just going to say that the city did look into this years and years and years ago. But I mean, I would agree with everything that Brock and Mac have said, this is, when you're looking at it, a list of actions, what if this becomes one that, oh, you know, you've run out of actions. This isn't going to add housing units. There are other ways to address livability and habitability, even in your municipal code, outside of landlord tenant law. And we've had different property maintenance standards in our municipal code, and it doesn't require the registration. Now, it'd be great to collect the data, but there are ways to collect some of this information through your permitting process. So I feel like this is a lot of work. We weren't successful years ago. We might today, but it's certainly something we would not probably look into as a housing strategy.
That's helpful insight. Thank you, Anne, and for sharing your prior experiences with that as well. Go ahead, Celestina.
Yeah, thanks. And that was actually a good transition, Anne. And I was just going to put voice to one of the things that we've heard a number of times throughout this rulemaking last year, and I think a little bit earlier this year, around the challenge of sometimes matching units with the folks who need them most, and that comes up often with accessibility. So I've heard that and you'll see in the adoption ready action, accessibility relevant information as part of the licensure. And so, and you know, you noted that perhaps there are other ways to get some of the data, like permit at the time of permit issuance and things like that, and that's valid. You know, there at the moment that type of information is not being collected, but there's a transition toward the fact that we need to start collecting accessibility production information anyway. But I just wanted to name that specifically as a potential benefit. Maybe it could be met in other ways, but I know that there was a fair amount of research referenced as well in the memo about sort of the pros and cons here. So I think certainly if this action were to be pursued for anything other than guidance, it sounds like we have some meeting of the minds and continued discussion to be had.
Thank you. Becky, one last word quickly before I move us along.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer a quick clarification and make sure that folks who might not have the memo in front of them, I just wanted to call out that the ARA itself does not include an inspection component, does not include collecting information on rent, and has optional to collect information on accessible units. That I think it might be worth putting some more guidance around, like the other stuff you like, sort of yellow flags on things that you might think you want to add and why you might not want to add them. There are some of those in the guidance, but we could highlight them more. I just wanted to be really clear that what's in here does not include those two components that could be more problematic and for the reasons that have been stated. So it's not to say that it would be no work for someone to do, but it is primarily focused on collecting information about the housing itself, and that's it. So just wanted to make that clear for anybody that hadn't looked at the specific language.
Great. Thank you, Becky. And while you're at it, why don't you carry on with lining us out for affirmative marketing requirement?
Okay, there we go. Now I think we've got the right thing shared. Okay. And on this one, I really want to give credit to Andre Tremblay, who did the absolute lion's share of the work in developing this one. She couldn't join us today, so I'm sharing it on her behalf, but just want to give credit where credit is due. So this one is an affirmative marketing requirement for units that receive city support. That could be city funding or land or similar types of things. And it would essentially, as a condition of receiving that local support, require that the property owners or property managers distribute information about availability at least at the initial lease up or initial sale, to partner organizations that have connections into communities that include protected classes, so that there is better information availability and awareness and opportunity to access those units. The example here, we were not able to identify any local examples, but the example that Andre drew from is one in Seattle. I would say that example also includes a sort of an earlier like a period before things open up, when it has to happen, that I don't think is baked into this ARA itself, but there's a whole set of guidance and templates that Andre put together that are meant to make it easier. There's, forms, all of the different sort of bits and pieces that are meant to make it easier for a jurisdiction to implement something like this. The other piece that it is contingent on is having a good set of outreach partners and community organizations that can help get the word out. And so there's some need to identify those organizations and develop enough of a relationship with them that, to get them to participate in a program like this and keep that list up to date. And I think the Seattle example, they also had a local city kind of website portal with this information, but that's like an optional piece that a jurisdiction can do. It's not sort of baked into this adoption ready action. And with that, I will, see what folks have to say about that one.
Great. Thank you, Becky. And just doing a little time check for all of us, if we could, we have one more to go after this one. I know that around land disposition, I want to make sure we have time for that. So maybe we take 10 minutes for this, so we can use most of the remainder for the last one. With that, Mac, please go ahead.
Thank you. This was the strategy in the packet that gave me kind of the most pause. And I would just give the comment that projects that have federal financing or OHCS funding for affordable housing already have to do this. So I would not want a local jurisdiction to also layer this on top of and create a duplicative but slightly different process that means double the work when it's already being done. Perhaps it could, like, if this is intended for, projects that are already not having to do this requirement, then that's another thing. But if a project is already required by the state to do this, then hopefully that state packet and submission can count for that local requirement. And if a jurisdiction is trying to collect additional data that the state isn't requesting within it, though I think it's going to be pretty similar, that the jurisdiction kind of work with the state to see if it's a way to incorporate within their process to collect that, as opposed to carving something out. Putting together these packets is quite a bit of work that our property managers do when they're not yet getting paid. And so I am sensitive to asking them to do something else again on top of it when they already have to comply with this for those sort of affordable developments there. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I don't think anyone is looking to add more layers and confusion on things already required. Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to plus one to what Mac just raised, and also what was raised earlier, the difficulty in identifying organizations. I actually just had an email land in my inbox yesterday where a developer is having a hard time with lease up and is required to utilize culturally specific organizations for advertising, and has used several of them and has not really received the applications that they were anticipating or hoping for. And I think this is largely due to those culturally specific organizations being pretty overextended at this point and not receiving support that they need in order to staff up to a level that that meets the demands right now. So I would hate to, actually slow down people getting in housing because of that. And in the end, I'm just advocating also for more support for culturally specific organizations, which this is not the forum, but saying it anyways.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And it is, one of the policy objectives to be thinking about capacity, I think, at all levels. And what we're encouraging here needs to be sensitive to that. So thank you for a real example on that as well. Brock, additional thoughts on this one?
Yeah, and I'll just give a +1 to the comments from Mac and Rachel. I reached out to my former boss, who's now the government affairs director for the Seattle-King County area, just because I was concerned that if this goes the other, because I support the intent, but I think there's a very fine line where cities could potentially start getting into trouble with fair housing violations if like applications are opened as opposed to just marketing prior. So that is not to say that I'm opposed to this. It's just to say that be careful when adopting it and make sure that you're not unintentionally violating fair housing law.
Good point. So another key consideration to add in there as well. And I want to acknowledge, I realize a lot of our colleagues who could really speak to this are no longer on the call because they had to go jump into another meeting, but I'm sure we can gather with them as well to get some additional advice. Last call for affirmative marketing requirement comments, or I will ask Becky to move on to the last one. Okay, Becky. We're almost there.
Last but not least, land disposition for housing. This is one that the components that we're able to provide here include example model RFP, model ground lease, and some language about addressing specific needs. It's a little bit of a strange one for an ARA in some ways because it depends on there being suitable land in the jurisdiction. So it does not provide suitable land. It does not identify suitable land, but it provides a little bit of it goes back to something that that Julia had raised earlier, I think, about sort of giving some examples for jurisdictions that might not have experience with this to help them just have some resources to be able to take any surplus land they do have and make it available to affordable housing. There were some examples of jurisdictions that have kind of done an inventory and have provided some information about the land that they could make available. There are examples of cities taking sort of a one-off piece of property, not having any sort of formal policy around it, but having a one-off piece of property and making that available through an RFP or a ground lease. So there's a lot of variability in kind of how this has played out at the local level. And we pulled from a number of different examples of, different RFPs and ground lease examples from different jurisdictions around the state. I will also say there's a lot of guidance from League of Oregon Cities on the specifics of land disposition and sort of legal requirements around land disposition generally that we did not attempt to recreate. See previous comment about us not being lawyers also. But we did reference that guidance that is out there. And then tried to sort of layer onto that, like what would it look like to take that process and apply it to affordable housing. There's still a lot of customization that would be needed on the local level of, a lot of work that would need to happen. So this is sort of just offering up a couple of tools that might support that process. I think that's all the pieces I want to cover on this, and I will look forward to folks' thoughts.
Great. Thank you, Becky. All right. Questions or comments about how to make this better, more usable land disposition for affordable housing? You all still there? Go ahead, Mac.
Thank you. Sorry, I feel like I'm taking a lot of oxygen.
No, please go.
But I just want to comment. So if you could actually pull back up that slide, please, in terms of like the different documents that are suggested as best practices for a jurisdiction to include in that RFP, I would just like to +1 things related to development readiness, that being a phase 1 environmental report, a hazmat report, depending on the age of the building, potentially, a geotechnical report, so a developer can know about the soils on site, as well as a preliminary title report. All those sorts of due diligence feasibility documents, if those are able to be completed by the city, included within that RFP package, it provides the developer with a bunch of information to make sure when they're submitting a proposal and response that they can be as accurate as possible in assessing the site and not have to, submit a proposal, get awarded the site, then commission a bunch of these other reports and realize, oh, a lot of these assumptions I made of how we could build on the site are wrong. The costs are now this. And then you're starting on the back foot from the very beginning. And so the inclusion of those sorts of due diligence would be really sort of important. The thing I would also highlight, if it's a LIHTC development, most often it will be most advantageous for the land to be transferred directly to the nonprofit. And then the nonprofit essentially, quote unquote, sells it to or donates it then to the limited partnership entity. You do not want the land going directly from the city into the partnership. And I bring that up just because if it's a direct transfer to that partnership, gift taxes are going to apply. And I don't think that would be a jurisdiction's intention, where if it flows first through the nonprofit and then into the limited partnership, those gift tax sort of provisions get waived and you're not having to pay, quote unquote, for this free land, if that makes sense there. And yeah, those are kinds of sort of the best practices that I'm thinking of like what should be structured and included in the RFP packet for the best responses, as well as for how to structure that. Should it be a full land transfer and not a ground lease? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mac. Appreciate that. Anne.
Sorry about that. I guess I should stay on camera. So we like this tool. We're using it, but I did want to note that the ORS 271.300 through 360 is really about transfer, lease, or donation. But if you're actually selling or disposing of property, it's the 221.725, and you might just want to have that reference in there or clarify that this tool would be for the donation. But I know that in talking to like Dev Northwest, for example, just having the opportunity to be the first one to maybe be considered as a purchaser of property is even helpful. So I feel like if you might want to just add the actual sale of real property, and it could be a reduced sale price or whatever if you're trying to incentivize certain types of housing, or at least housing first for eligible property. But the LOC guidebook references them both, and I just thought we should include the other ORS statute references in the materials.
Thank you for that. I'm seeing some nodding heads on that. Any questions from the team about that? Good. Okay. Clear. Excellent. Yeah, Rachel, please.
I just want to advocate for any form documentation that is possible to be implemented. Even, if cities and counties throughout the state could have the same form available, that has real life benefits in development in terms of keeping legal costs down. For example, at my organization, if we could take, an agreement that was okayed by our attorney in the last deal that we did and just redline it against the next deal that we have. And, the only changes that were made were the names of the entities and, just immaterial clauses. We wouldn't have to have it reviewed by council. And that actually does save, thousands of dollars per development and has real life impact for at least affordable housing.
Thank you. Great insight. Other questions, key considerations, thoughts on improvements for the land disposition for affordable housing action? Okay. We have about 5 minutes. If you have any other comments on prior actions, anyone else, any of the other actions we've talked about, or all the actions we've talked about, if you have a burning thought that has come up since we discussed that particular item that you'd like to share. And of course, you can always email us. Okay. I'm going to move us into wrapping up. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate you participating in what is more of a workshop experience than we always have in these meetings, but it's been super helpful in dialing in and providing us some additional ideas. Before we talk about next steps, I just want to check in on the framework around racial equity for decision making. Thea lined us out at the beginning to think about specifically benefits and burdens and accountability. I heard, I'll just offer up and then I'll open it up for others to contribute. Quite a few sort of thoughts and considerations that could potentially impact housing production and thinking about that balance of benefits and burdens. One example that just popped in my mind is Rachel mentioned specifically the need to sort of understand and consider local capacity of partners who may be helping with something like the affirmative marketing work, and thinking about the many requests that culturally sensitive and culturally appropriate partners, education partners are already under, and sort of impacts of carrying on and adding to their list. While it might be a great opportunity, it could also be really crushing. And what are the impacts of getting people in housing if the timing is just off on that? Accountability, I heard quite a few mentions, especially those of you who work with subsidized housing production, already having quite a few different ways that you are held accountable to your requirements, and just being mindful if new local programs are created that we're not adding to that burden, but making sure that the accountability makes sense and hopefully sort of not hopefully, ideally dovetailing with those requirements that already exist. Other insights, reflections on our discussion today and how sort of the quest for finding the right balance between benefits and burdens and accountability might play out.
Thanks, Deb. Yeah, I heard the benefits and burdens element show up in the conversation about the rental licensing program as well, and really, again, trying to parse out even who is benefit and who benefits and who is burdened. And I think should we discuss that item or others a little bit more, we could continue to unpack not only generically like there are benefits and there are burdens, but even going to that next level down of, who in our communities could benefit and who in our communities would be burdened. So I heard some discussion, some beginnings of that discussion there as well.
Thank you. Thea. Oh, you're on, somehow you're muted, Thea. I don't know how, because you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Okay. We'll hear from Thea some other time. Sorry. I don't know what happened there. Anyone else like to reflect on benefits and burdens or accountability before we close out? Okay. How about next steps? Oh, go ahead, Kathy. Thank you.
I just want to point out that we have not discussed racial impacts at all on any of these proposals. And I think that's going to be important, as well as getting poverty, people on the 0 to 30% and 30 to 60% cited in existing areas of benefits. We need to address those two items, and we did not do that today.
Good point. You are correct. Thank you for pointing that out. And maybe we can aspire to do, not just aspire, but to structure the agenda a little differently as when we talk about these in the future to make sure we hit on those points. Thank you, Kathy, for that. I really appreciate the insight.
I might just offer, we're a little bit early here, and you know, I do think we have time and can make time. It would be, folks' minds might have moved on already at this point, but I just think your comment is meaningful, Kathy. And if there is anything you want to add now, or anything that we could investigate a little bit further that's top of mind for anybody with regard to racial equity and with regard to the impacts of our discussion today on racialized outcomes, I think we do have a few minutes.
I would just point out that one of the things, I live in the Cully neighborhood, Fremont and 47th, and there have been a lot of, there's been a lot of construction by the Native American community around here that is both affordable and culturally specific. And I'm happy to see that initiative, but I don't think anything we've talked about would provide an incentive or a way for example, the African American community to do the same thing, or a Hispanic. So I think there are good models, and I've been impressed. I think they have 4 or 5 different buildings, multi-story. So I'm impressed with that, but we need to figure out how we can duplicate that for other people who we need to address the disparities.
Thank you. Excellent point. Anyone else have thoughts on how racial equity could be brought more in the forefront in this conversation and the actions?
I wonder, I mean, when we did speak about culturally specific organizations today and the role that they can play, we were speaking about the affirmative marketing plan, at least that's the one I recall. And we were discussing capacity constraints. And so, you know, it's not one of the adoption ready actions listed today, but maybe a direction for additional consideration would be some sort of capacity building support, or even advocacy, since we are talking about the local government level, advocating for or partnering with other governmental entities or organizations who are able to support capacity building. Seems like a potential avenue, because Kathy, I'm hearing in your comment, you know, there are places where we've had successes, and then there are other places where there's still definitely gaps in how we're serving our community and folks of different races across our community.
Yeah, Julia, go ahead.
Yeah, I do just want to give, I don't know, some shout outs to some of the other ARAs that I think really do have benefits to culturally specific organizations with limited capacity. things like the tax exemptions and SDC waivers and things that reduce carrying costs, and just general kind of overhead that a nonprofit organization has to have in order to kind of get into the development world. All of those are valuable. And so, I mean, I'm glad that, we're taking a minute to kind of more explicitly acknowledge that, but I just want to make sure we recognize that like nearly all the tools that we're talking about today have some beneficial impact on an organization's capacity to provide housing through capital or processes being streamlined and things like that. I'll also note that the state, I believe, OHCS, I know, has been, kind of putting together larger support systems and kind of like matchmaking services, so to speak, for culturally organizations that have lower capacity. So there is a lot of work being done by the state that's kind of intersectional to this. And so I just want to make sure that that's being brought into this space to know that that's out there as well. Not saying we've solved it all by any means, but I just kind of want to give some kudos where there is potentially positive outcomes from the work we're doing and other departments at the state.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Julia. And Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, this will be brief, but in that similar spirit that Julia was touching on there, kind of just want to explicitly call out the strong correlation between income and race, and that advancing opportunities for more affordable housing throughout our state helps open up additional opportunities for minority groups, disadvantaged populations, and the like. It's not a one-for-one, and I'm not trying to claim that, but I know from our experience as an affordable housing operator, our portfolio and the residents in our portfolio are far more diverse than the jurisdictions that those developments are sited in, more diverse than the metro region as a whole, and the like. And so just thinking about that intersection there between race and income and how that plays out. And so as we increase those opportunities, for folks of lower incomes, it does tag on and dovetail a little bit with increasing racial equity opportunities. There still is more to be done. There always will be, but just wanted to call out that intersection explicitly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mac. And thank you, Kathy, for raising this not only as a really important piece we weren't directly discussing, but also offering an opportunity for others to remind us of those indirect connections that are quite real in the world, the correlations. Okay. Thank you all. We will continue on this path in the future. Next steps, Thea and Celestina will be in touch about upcoming meetings. And so keep an eye on your emails and we'll close it out for there. You all have from prior emails, the email address for getting in touch with the DLCD team and providing more comments. If you have specific comments or additional thoughts after today on the ARAs, please don't hesitate to do so. We always ask that you let us know if you intend the comment to be a public comment or just for the team. But if you forget that part, I'll be in touch or someone will be in touch to ask that same question. Anything else from the team before we close?
Just appreciation. Lots of really great insights today.
Indeed. Thank you all for bringing your whole selves and your brains to us. We'll talk soon. Have a good holiday weekend.